Little boy knocked and said, "They took my dad's flag." The veteran next door did the unthinkable. Snow fell heavy over a quiet Montana night. Inside his lonely cabin, a retired Marine thought his battles were long over, until a small hand knocked on his door. The boy was crying, his voice trembling in the cold. They took my dad's flag, and in that moment, the old soldier realized some fights never end. Snow whispered across the dark Montana valley, soft and relentless, blanketing the small town in silence. Jack Turner sat alone by the fire, the steady crackle of wood, the only sound against the howling wind outside. His cabin walls were lined with memories, medals dulled by time, photos of men who never came home. Above the mantel, a folded American flag rested like a sacred relic. The old Marine took a slow sip of whiskey, the warmth doing little to thaw the cold inside him. Then came the knock. 3 soft raps, hesitant, fragile, cutting through the storm. Jack froze, his instincts sharpened by years of discipline. No one visited him this late, especially not in a blizzard. The knock came again, followed by the faint sound of a child's sob. He rose, boots heavy on the wooden floor, and opened the door to a sight that carved straight through the years of silence. There, under the flickering porch light, stood a boy, no more than 7. Snow clung to his eyelashes, and his small hands trembled around an empty wooden flag case. His breath came out in white clouds as he looked up, eyes wide with confusion and pain. "They took my dad's flag," he whispered, voice breaking like thin ice. For a long moment, Jack couldn't move. He saw himself reflected in the boy's tears, a man who'd buried too many friends beneath folded flags. The storm pressed against the doorway, as if urging him to act. Without a word, he stepped aside and let the child in. The warmth of the cabin swallowed the boy whole, but it couldn't melt the grief between them. The door closed on the howling night, leaving only the quiet crackle of the fire and the sound of a boy's trembling breath. Jack knelt beside him, eyes falling on the empty case. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Some things spoke louder than words. The boy clutched the case to his chest, like it was life itself. His small shoulders shook as he whispered, "It was my dad's. He was a soldier." Jack's throat tightened, memories flooding back. The faces, the gunfire, the folded flags laid into Mother's arms. He swallowed hard, forcing composure. "What's your name, son?" "Ethan," the boy said softly. "Ethan Miller." Jack nodded, glancing toward the firelight where his own flag sat folded and still. The sight cut deep, a mirror of duty and loss. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, firm, steady, the way a Marine would anchor a comrade in chaos. "You're safe here?" he said quietly. Outside, the blizzard screamed against the glass, but inside, 2 generations of grief found shelter in shared silence. Jack's cabin, once a fortress of solitude, had become something else that night, a refuge for the last flicker of honor in a fading town. The snow kept falling, erasing footprints, but some moments were too heavy for time to cover. As the firelight danced across the walls, Jack looked at his own reflection in the whiskey glass, a man once built for war, now trembling before a child's broken faith. He didn't know it yet, but that midnight knock had already rewritten the course of his quiet existence. Somewhere in the storm the past had come knocking, and this time it wore the face of a boy. Morning crept over the mountains, painting the cabin windows in pale gold. The storm had passed, but its silence lingered like an unfinished prayer. Ethan sat wrapped in a wool blanket, his small hands tracing the outline of the empty flag case. The wooden frame gleamed faintly in the firelight, hollow and accusing. Jack poured 2 mugs of cocoa, one dark, one light, and placed the smaller cup beside the boy. "Drink," he said softly. Ethan obeyed, though his eyes never left the case. Across the room, Jack's own folded flag seemed to glow beneath the morning sun, its 13 folds casting long shadows across the mantel. "The flag was all we had left," Ethan murmured, his voice thin. "Mom said it meant my dad was still watching over us." Jack turned away, hiding the storm behind his eyes. He remembered his own wife saying the same thing when the funerals never seemed to stop. But no symbol, no matter how sacred, could guard a boy against cruelty. The Marine's jaw clenched as he knelt beside the child. "Where did you last see it?" he asked quietly. Ethan pointed toward the window, his gaze distant. "In my room. It was in the case on the shelf. When we came home last night, the window was broken. Mom said maybe animals ... But I saw footprints." Jack's gut twisted. He didn't need proof to know the truth. This wasn't chance. It was carelessness, the kind that eats away at respect until nothing's left but dust. He stood, pacing by the fire, his boots echoing against the wooden floor. The boy's loss had become his own. The silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken. Jack finally broke it, his voice low, steady. "That flag isn't just cloth, Ethan. It's a story, a promise. When someone takes it, they steal more than fabric. They steal meaning." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "Will we get it back?" Jack looked toward the snowy hills outside, their white expanse reflecting the weight of his own memories. "We will," he said after a pause, "but not just to have it again, to remind them why it mattered." His tone carried no anger, only a quiet resolve, the kind that had led men through darker nights than this. Ethan smiled faintly for the first time, trusting him completely. Jack felt something shift, a small flame reigniting where years of loss had left only ash. As the fire popped softly, he reached for his coat and hat. "Rest now," he said. "Tomorrow we'll start finding the truth." The boy curled up on the couch, flag case beside him, sleep claiming him like a mercy. Jack stood over him, watching the slow rhythm of his breath. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty. It felt like purpose had found its way home. Outside, the snow glittered beneath a rising sun. The world looked clean again, untouched, but Jack knew better. Somewhere out there, beneath the same flag he'd once fought for, someone had forgotten what honor meant. And as he looked back at the sleeping boy, he made a silent vow he would remind them. The sun rose pale over the frozen ridges, turning the world into a field of glass. Jack Turner's truck rumbled through the empty streets, its tires crunching against snow that no one had bothered to clear. The town looked peaceful from a distance, but up close it was tired, flags hanging limp, porches unshoveled, hearts asleep. He slowed as he passed the diner, the same one he used to visit with his wife before the war had hardened him. Inside he could see faces he once knew, older now, dulled by years of routine. The chatter was faint through the window, but he caught enough to feel the sting. "Kids these days don't care about anything," one man said, shaking his head. Another replied, "World's changed." Can't expect them to care about some old cloth. Jack stared for a moment longer, his hands gripping the wheel until his knuckles turned white. He'd parked near the old Veterans Hall, boarded up, forgotten, the flagpole rusted and bare. The sight of it hurt more than the wind slicing through his coat. He could almost hear the echoes of parades long gone, the laughter, the music, the pride that used to fill this very street. All of it now reduced to memory. The silence of the place felt heavier than gunfire. When he returned home that afternoon, Ethan was outside stacking wood beside the porch. The boy worked carefully, his face pink from the cold. "Town looks quiet," he said as Jack stepped out of the truck. Jack nodded. "Too quiet." People stopped caring when no one made them remember. The words came out rough, but there was something almost hopeful in them, like the start of a plan forming behind his eyes. He watched Ethan for a moment, remembering the fire that used to live in men's hearts when the flag still meant something sacred. "You ever fold one?" Jack asked. Ethan shook his head. Jack lifted his own flag gently from the mantel, showing the boy how each fold meant something: life, honor, sacrifice. By the time they finished, the boy's hands no longer shook from cold, but from reverence. That night, as the cabin lights dimmed, Jack sat by the fire again, notebook open beside his drink. He wrote names, not of enemies, but of boys from the high school he'd seen lingering near the bleachers. He wasn't sure why yet, but instinct told him the answer was waiting there, buried under teenage laughter and apathy. He glanced at Ethan, who was already asleep on the couch, the empty flag case beside him. The Marine's heart ached at the sight, the kind of ache only a man who's buried too much could know. He whispered to the flames, "If they've forgotten what it means, I'll remind them." The storm outside had quieted, but a different kind of storm began inside him, one of purpose, not rage. The kind that doesn't roar but burns slow and steady until it changes everything it touches. When Jack finally turned in, he left the notebook open on the table, the words written across the top in his steady hand. Honor is not lost, it's abandoned. And come morning, he would start bringing it back. The dawn was gray and sharp, the kind of morning that made breath hang in the air like smoke. Jack's truck crept past the high school on the edge of town, its parking lot empty except for a few boot prints frozen in the snow. He stepped out, the cold biting through his gloves, and followed the trail around the back toward the bleachers. What he found there made his stomach twist. The flag lay half buried in slush, its stars smeared with mud, its stripes torn clean through. Around it were footprints, beer cans, and the crushed remnants of a phone tripod. He knelt, running a gloved hand across the fabric, feeling the weight of every life that flag had ever honored. The snowflakes landing on it looked like tiny apologies that would never be enough. Then he heard it, laughter. Faint, careless, teenage laughter echoing from behind the gym. He peered around the corner and saw 3 boys huddled together, one of them replaying a video on his phone. On the screen, the flag was being stomped and mocked, each kick followed by cheers. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. For a moment, every instinct screamed for him to act. His hands trembled as they once did in combat. His pulse thundered, his vision narrowing until all he saw was red and white and disrespect. He could have stepped out, could have ended it right there. 3 boys, 1 Marine. The odds meant nothing. But then, in the faint reflection of the gym window, he saw Ethan's face, innocent, trusting, looking up at him from the night before. The rage cracked. The soldier in him stood down. He took a slow breath, forcing his fists to unclench. "Not this way," he whispered under his breath. "Not any more." With deliberate calm, he reached down, lifted the tattered flag from the snow, and folded it gently, each crease a silent act of defiance against the chaos that had replaced respect. He returned to the truck, the flag resting carefully on the seat beside him. The laughter still echoed faintly behind him, but it no longer stirred fury, only sadness. The world he had fought for felt distant now, its values fading into noise. But he knew one thing. If honor had been mocked for attention, he would restore it through example. As he drove back toward the cabin, the sky began to open, streaks of pink and gold cutting through gray. The flag on the passenger seat caught the light, torn but still bright. Jack glanced at it, and a faint smile crossed his lips. "Still standing," he muttered. He didn't know yet how he would make them understand, but he would. Maybe not with punishment. Maybe not even with anger, but with something stronger, something every real Marine knew by heart: discipline, respect, and example. By the time he reached home, Ethan was waiting at the window, face pressed against the glass. Jack stepped out of the truck, holding the flag like a wounded friend. "You found it," Ethan breathed. Jack nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "But now we have to fix more than fabric." Morning sharpened the frost on Main Street like glass. Jack parked outside the sheriff's office, the flag folded in his coat. He stepped in, boots echoing on scuffed tile floors. Deputy Mark Harlan looked up with a tired, practiced smile. "Morning, Jack. What can I do for you today?" Jack laid the torn fabric on the desk, careful and firm. Harlan's eyes flicked over the threads, then away. "Kids being kids," he said, voice flat as paperwork. "Let insurance handle it before this gets messy." The words fell like snow that refused to melt. Jack's jaw squared, but his voice stayed calm. "This is a burial flag, Deputy. A dead man's honor." Harlan sighed, glancing toward a closed inner door. "Let's not escalate something small into something big." Small sounded like a slap across an old scar. The door opened, and Mayor Rick Dalton stepped out. Starch, stiff suit, church smile, eyes that measured. "Well now, Jack, we all appreciate your service." He palmed the flag, then nudged it back politely. "Let me handle it quietly for the good of the town." Quietly meant buried where no one looked. Jack felt the room tilt toward convenience, not truth. The mayor's tone was syrup with a steel aftertaste. "This kind of thing fades if we don't feed it." He smiled as if that were kindness, not control. Jack studied Dalton's face and saw the seams. There was fear under the easy grin, and motive, too. He wondered which son, nephew, or donor needed cover. The flag between them seemed to breathe and wait. Harlan shuffled papers, refusing Jack's steady eyes. "Thank you for your time," Jack said at last. He folded the flag again with measured hands. Every crease felt like a verdict against indifference. He tucked it inside his coat like a heartbeat. Then he walked out into air sharper than truth. Outside, the town moved on at a sleepy drift. A snowplow groaned. A dog barked at nothing. Jack stood still and listened for something real. A bell from the church tower marked the hour. Each strike sounded like a promise being tested. He drove past the diner without looking in. He did not need gossip to know its flavor. He turned instead toward the long road north. The mountains wore their white crowns in silence. Honor, he thought, is loudest when no one claps. By the time he reached the cabin, the day had thinned. Ethan watched from the window with hopeful eyes. Jack nodded once, steady as a salute. "We'll do this right," he said, voice low. "Not their way, ours." The fire took quickly as evening fell. Jack placed the flag on the mantel, facing east. He wrote 3 names in his notebook and closed it. Paper could wait. Character could not. In the quiet, he chose the harder road on purpose. He found Sarah Miller at the clinic after sunset. Fluorescent lights hummed over scrub-green halls. She moved from room to room with a nurse's grace. Grief sat neatly behind her eyes like folded linen. Work was the only thing that did not break. They spoke in the supply alcove between rounds. Sarah's hands held a clipboard like a shield. "I can't lose more, Mr. Turner. Not another fight." Her voice was calm, but the edges were thin. "People talk. Trouble always finds our door." Jack listened the way Marines listen to wind. He made no promise he could not keep. "I won't bring harm to your boy or your home." He said it plain, like a fact already true. Some things are fixed by example, not force. She looked at his coat, at what it concealed. The flag was all Ethan had that felt steady. Her words softened on the name of her son. "Every night he asks what the folds mean. Every night I run out of good answers." Jack's gaze eased without losing focus. He remembered a different waiting room long ago. His wife smiling brave through scans and wires. He remembered promising to carry what she could not. That vow still lived, even if it limped. "Whoever took it thinks nothing is sacred," he said. "But a boy is watching how we answer that. Rage teaches nothing but noise and fear. Discipline teaches meaning when words fail. I will show them what honor looks like standing." Sarah's shoulders loosened just a breath. "What if the town looks away again?" she asked. "Then we become the town that does not," Jack said. Simple, unadorned, the way oaths sound. He did not blink when the hallway lights flickered. She nodded, a small yes carved from hard days. "If you must go, go careful," she whispered. "There are names that never get written down." He understood exactly which names she meant. Power had a habit of hiding its sons. He reached for nothing but his cap. No badge, no weapon, no borrowed authority. Only the steadiness of years and a clean plan. "I'll bring back more than cloth," he said. "I'll bring back the reason it mattered." At the door, she touched his sleeve once. "Thank you," she said, almost to the floor. For a moment they were 2 people in winter. One who healed, one who endured, both grieving. The kind of American mercy no camera sees. He stepped into night that smelled of cold iron. Snow began again, patient and unafraid. The street lights made halos on the empty road. His truck waited, old and faithful in the dark. He started the engine like starting a prayer. The cabin welcomed him with honest heat. Ethan slept on the couch, blanket to his chin. Jack laid the folded flag beside the hearth. He stood long enough to feel the room settle. Then he chose the hour he would begin. Night pressed against the windows like an old memory. Jack sat before the fire, hands open to the heat. The cabin creaked the way field tents used to breathe. Every pop of the logs sounded like distant small arms. Silence filled the gaps with voices he still knew by name. His medals reflected a shiver of light on the wall. They didn't look like glory, they looked like debt. He remembered the chaplain's hands on folded cloth. He remembered a wife who smiled through fear. He remembered promising to live like their lives mattered. The folded flag on the mantel seemed heavier tonight. 13 precise creases, 13 quiet instructions. He thought of Ethan's careful hands learning the folds. He thought of boys in this town learning something else. The weight of example settled on his shoulders like armor. Rage paced inside him, hungry and certain. But rage had never rebuilt anything worth keeping. He studied the room as if it were a map. Firelight drew lines across the floor like roots. He marked each line with patience, not fury. He opened his notebook and wrote one sentence. Honor isn't taught by yelling. It's taught by standing. The words steadied the tremor in his fingers. He underlined them once, then closed the book. Action, he knew, would make them true. He walked the cabin the way Marines walk a perimeter. Checking locks, checking mind, checking purpose. He paused at a photograph of his unit in desert sun. Some faces grinned like they still believed in tomorrow. He whispered each name the way a man sharpens steel. Snow hissed softly against the chimney cap. The storm had slowed, but winter kept watch. Jack pulled on his coat and lifted the flag. He placed it back with a small, firm nod. "Tomorrow," he said, as if giving an order. He warmed a glass with water and stood quietly. Let thoughts settle like silt in a jar. What was needed was not punishment, but proof. Proof that respect could be relearned by doing. Proof that one night could redeem a season. He turned out the lamps and let darkness breathe. The cabin exhaled, the timbers easing their weight. He laid down without removing his boots. Old habit, old comfort, old readiness. Sleep came like a sentry who finally trusted the shift. In the last edge of waking, he saw the path. Tracks in snow leading where boys hide pride. He saw old portraits gathering dust in a hall. He saw a rope that could carry a flag again. The plan rose with the first hint of dawn. Before daybreak, the truck rolled quiet through town. Headlights skimmed fences, mailboxes, sleeping dogs. Jack followed the memory of boot prints and laughter. He knew where boys went to feel untouchable. Shadows still wore their names on every wall. The Veterans Hall sat hunched behind the church. Windows boarded, paint scarred by winters. A flagpole leaned like a tired sentinel. The rope was frayed, the cleat iced over. Honor had been left outside to rust. He killed the engine and listened to the world. Somewhere a plow groaned down Main Street. Snow fell in thin, steady needles of light. He breathed slow until his pulse matched the night. Then he moved like training had taught him. Around back, the side door hung crooked. Graffiti screamed where honor used to whisper. Inside smelled of beer, cheap cologne, cold dust. Teenage laughter rattled through the gutted hall. They were louder than their courage would ever be. Jack stayed in the doorway, a shadow inside shadows. 3 boys, a speaker, a half-warmed pizza box. Empty cans skittered when a boot nudged them. A dartboard wore a paper bullseye of a flag. Throws missed, but the mockery never did. On the walls, portraits watched in cracked frames. Uniforms faded, eyes still clear behind glass. Names typed on yellowed cards beneath each one. Jack felt their company the way a man feels gravity. The weight pulled him toward patience, not wrath. One boy flicked a lighter beneath a ribbon. Another filmed hunting laughs on a glowing screen. The third kicked at an old display case. Glass chimed, then held, stubborn as a promise. Jack's jaw tightened, then eased deliberately. He stepped closer, still unseen, and looked upward. The rafters held dust like unfallen snow. He imagined this hall lit on memorial mornings. Bugles, boots, the soft cry of hidden tears. The memory burned cleaner than the boy's noise. His hands opened and closed, choosing restraint. He counted breaths, counted exits, counted hearts. He did not need a weapon for this fight. He needed a plan the town couldn't ignore. A plan the boys would carry in their bones. He took one silent step back into the cold. The air felt honest against his face. He pictured shovels, hammers, oil for hinges. He pictured dawn rising over a raised flag, and boys learning respect the hard, right way. When he reached the truck, he didn't look back. The hall could wait for the lesson it deserved. Snow gathered on the windshield like quiet approval. He set the wipers and the course in one motion. By sunrise he would have the tools and the truth. Snow had softened the streets into pale quiet when school let out. Ethan trudged home alone, backpack dragging through slush. Behind him came laughter, sharp, cruel, and practiced. 3 boys followed, the same faces Jack had seen in the hall. "Old soldier's pet," one sneered. "Gonna salute your hero?" Ethan's steps quickened, but pride kept him from running. Their words landed like stones, each heavier than the last. He clutched his backpack straps and stared straight ahead. His father's flag, his neighbor's faith, both mocked at once. The ache in his chest was too big for his small frame. When he turned the corner, tears blurred the snowbanks. He sat down beside a fence, breath catching, cheeks red. Somewhere nearby a church bell counted the hour. He counted it, too, wishing it could drown the noise inside. For a boy, shame feels louder than thunder. A pickup slowed beside him, tires grinding to a stop. Jack stepped out, coat pulled tight, eyes calm but sharp. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew. The boy's silence said enough. His tears finished the story. Jack crouched beside him, the wind whistling through wire fences. "Sometimes doing right means standing alone," Jack said. Ethan looked up, eyes rimmed with salt and pride. "Even when it hurts?" the boy asked quietly. Jack nodded. "Especially when it hurts. That's when it counts." The boy's breath steadied, small but brave. They sat there together, 2 generations of defiance. The town's cold crept around them, but courage held the space. Jack's voice softened as he continued. "Those boys don't hate you. They just don't know what respect looks like anymore. We'll show them, by never stooping to their level." Ethan nodded, the lesson etching itself into his young bones. Snowflakes landed on their shoulders like quiet medals. When they finally rose, the world felt heavier but clearer. Ethan wasn't just a boy now. He was a witness. Jack could see the spark that had once lived in his own reflection. They walked home in silence, footprints twin and steady. Behind them the laughter had already faded into fog. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had begun to fall. Inside, the flag waited by the fire, patient and pure. And for the first time, Ethan smiled without apology. By morning, word had spread like smoke in dry grass. Jack's fence stood defaced in angry red letters. Old soldier equals old fool, sprayed across clean wood. The paint dripped down like bleeding mockery. Ethan saw it first, his face pale with disbelief. Jack stepped outside slowly, eyes tracing every line. The letters didn't sting. They confirmed what he already knew. The sickness wasn't just in the boys. It was in the town. He fetched a bucket of water, sponge, and silence. Ethan followed, helping without being told. They worked side by side under a pale winter sun. Each stroke of the sponge erased a piece of contempt. Neighbors passed by, pretending not to see. Some looked away out of shame, others out of fear. Silence had become the town's safest religion. Pastor Whitman stopped by that afternoon, hat in hand. "Jack," he said gently, "maybe let it go for peace's sake." Peace. The word felt hollow as a spent shell. Jack straightened, his voice quiet but unbending. "Peace built on cowardice isn't peace, Pastor. It's surrender." Whitman sighed, offering a prayer instead of a solution. Jack thanked him politely, then returned to the fence. Ethan watched, understanding more than a child should. Each scrub of the wood was a refusal to bow. Honor, he realized, was something you did, not said. By dusk the letters were gone, but their echo lingered. Inside, Jack stood at the window, watching snow begin again. The world outside looked clean, but he knew better. A sickness of apathy had taken root in familiar soil. He would have to cure it one act at a time. Later that night, as wind rattled the chimney, Jack opened his notebook and drew a line through a name. He didn't plan revenge. He planned redemption. Sometimes men fight enemies with rifles. Sometimes with hammers and light. He closed the book, steady in purpose. If silence was the town's disease, then example was the cure. Tomorrow, he'd begin showing them what honor rebuilt looked like. Ethan slept soundly in the next room, unaware of the weight waiting. Jack whispered to the flag, "We rise again at dawn." The next morning broke cold and colorless. Jack's truck traced a quiet path through drifting snow. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, only that truth waited somewhere. When the heart won't let go, the boots just start walking. And Montana has a way of giving up its secrets to those who listen. He stopped by Mrs. Langley's porch, where gossip moved faster than mail. The old woman poured coffee with the authority of a judge. "Terrible business, Jack," she said, shaking her head. "Boys these days no discipline, no respect." Her tone shifted, softer. "But one of them's got a powerful father." Jack's eyes narrowed. "You know which?" She hesitated, then sighed, eyes darting toward town. "Tyler Dalton," she whispered. "Mayor's boy. Always thought the world owed him." Her words fell heavy in the snow between them. Jack nodded once, the final piece sliding into place. He left her porch with more than a name. He left with clarity. The mayor's charm, the deputy's dismissal, the pastor's advice for peace. It all made sense now, a quiet machinery of protection. Justice had been traded for convenience again. Jack's steps felt heavier, but his purpose lighter. He drove past the diner and saw faces press against frosted glass. They whispered behind steam and coffee cups, pretending not to watch. He was the story now, the crazy vet stirring trouble. But he didn't care. Some stories needed to be told through action. and he was done asking for permission to do what was right. At home, Ethan greeted him at the door, bright and hopeful. "Did you find who did it?" he asked. Jack hesitated, then knelt. "I found why they're getting away with it." The boy frowned, not understanding. "Why?" Jack's answer was simple. "Because good men stop standing up." That night he wrote 3 words in his notebook. "Truth has weight." He underlined it twice, hard enough to dent the page. Then he packed a lantern, gloves, and tools. Not for war, but for work. If power feared noise, he would make meaning louder instead. And he knew exactly where the noise needed to start. Outside, the sky bled into a deep, starless blue. The flag above the cabin hung still, wrapped in frost. Jack touched its corner gently, the fabric stiff with cold. He thought of every man he'd buried, every boy he'd once trained. Then he whispered, "Tomorrow night we fight different." Snow came again, slow, steady, relentless. Jack stood by the window, watching flakes blur the pines. The world looked peaceful enough to lie about itself. He turned from it, loading his truck bed with quiet purpose. Not rifles or rounds, but tools, rope, and restoration. He looked once more at the folded flag on the mantel. It caught the light from the fire like memory made visible. He placed a gloved hand beside it and bowed his head. No words, just a Marine's silent prayer of intent. Every battle worth fighting, he knew, began within. Ethan stirred from the couch, rubbing his eyes. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice small in the firelight. Jack smiled faintly. "To fix something broken." The boy nodded, too tired to question it. But Jack saw curiosity and faith in his glance. He stepped outside, the night swallowing him whole. The air smelled like pine, diesel, and promise. His breath clouded as he opened the driver's door. Somewhere in the distance a church bell marked 9. He shifted the truck into gear and followed its echo. The roads were empty except for snow ghosts swirling. Headlights carved tunnels through the storm. Jack thought of the boys, reckless, ignorant, lost. He thought of the mayor, blind by choice, and of Sarah, who still prayed over what men forgot to protect. When he reached the Veterans Hall, it looked smaller than before, more broken, more forgotten, more waiting to be redeemed. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, hands still. "Not with anger," he murmured, "with example." Then he stepped out into the cold and began to move. He opened the back of the truck and lifted the first tool. A hammer, old but true, the same one he'd used building fences with his wife. He placed it on the hood, alongside nails and lanterns. Each tool a soldier of a new kind of war. A war for memory, fought without noise. Inside, the hall was empty, though echoes lingered. The laughter from before had frozen into dust. He lit the lantern, and its glow touched faces in old portraits. One by one, the ghosts of soldiers looked alive again. Jack nodded to them, like a commander greeting his men. He tested the flagpole outside. Rope stiff, cleat rusted. It would take hours to fix, maybe all night. That was fine. He had nowhere else to be. He could hear the past, whispering in approval. And if the vandals returned, they'd meet a lesson, not a fight. As he tightened the last bolt, snow fell thicker. His breath came steady, his heart steady too. He wasn't waiting for help or permission anymore. He was simply doing what should have been done all along. In the distance, a light flickered. Headlights approaching. Headlights knifed through the snowfall and cut. The boys piled out, laughter steaming in the cold. Boots crunched, a speaker thumped hollow bravado. They swaggered toward the door, kings of nothing. Jack stepped from shadow like a verdict delivered. He didn't shout. He simply stood and waited. Silence folded their noise into the dark. "Put that down," he said, nodding at the spray can. A single nod, a single order, perfectly calm. Something in them obeyed before thought could argue. "Here's what happens next," Jack said evenly. He set a shovel against each boy's chest, then a hammer, then a coil of new rope. "You broke it. Now fix it tonight." Authority curled off him like breath in winter. One boy scoffed, chin lifting toward the sky. "Old man, you can't make us do." Jack's gaze trimmed the sentence to silence. "Men earn their names by what they repair. Decide if you plan to be men." They glanced at each other, suddenly smaller. Snow thickened, softening the world's edges. Jack turned, struck the first nail himself. The sound rang clean as a bell. Work began because there was no place left to hide. Hours blurred into the rhythm of doing. Boards measured, bolts tightened, hinges freed. Lantern light painted honest sweat on young faces. Cold gnawed fingers until pride quit first. The speaker sat quiet like a mouth learning manners. Exhaustion thinned their defiance to truth. A boy's breath rattled. He wiped his eyes. "Why do you care so much?" he muttered. Jack answered without pausing his hands. "Because men better than me gave everything." Inside, portraits watched the lesson land. Eyes in cracked frames met eyes still learning. The boys worked softer around those names. Hammer strikes gentled into careful taps. Respect is a sound you can actually hear. Near midnight, one kicked at the old rope. It frayed in his palm like a bad habit. Jack placed the new coil across his hands. Feed it through. Feel the weight. Rope whispered through the pulley like memory. At the darkest hour, frost rimed their brows. Jack wrapped his coat around no one. He gave them time instead, an example. Hands bled a little. No one bragged. The hall grew warm with effort, not heat. When the last hinge swung true, they stopped. Breaths hung in the lantern's patient glow. Jack looked at the ceiling, then the door. Dawn is close. Get ready to raise it. No one asked what it meant anymore. They stepped outside, boots sinking to ankle. The flag waited, folded tight against his chest. Jack placed it in the oldest boy's hands. Hold it like a person you can't replace. Snowlight made their faces look almost new. The horizon blushed, faint as a first apology. Birds tested the air with single notes. The town exhaled steam from sleeping rooftops. Jack set the cleat, tested the line twice. "On my mark," he said, voice low as prayer. They lifted together, palms careful, eyes clear. Stars rose first, then stripes, then the whole. Cold wind caught it and turned it living. Fabric cracked, then softened into flight. A hush dropped over everything that could hear. Footsteps gathered on the road without words. Neighbors in coats, Pastor Whitman, Mrs. Langley, Sarah and Ethan at the front, hands joined tight. Even Deputy Harlan drifted near the curb. The mayor lingered back, face pale with math. The boys stood beside the pole, bone-tired. Grease blackened their knuckles like pennants. They stared up as if meeting themselves. Something unclenched, behind their ribs. Respect arrived and took its rightful seat. Jack saluted, slow and exact, eyes steady. Ethan mirrored him, small hand to brow. Sarah's breath hitched, tears warming her face. Portraits inside the hall seemed to stand taller. The wind folded their witness into the morning. Pastor Whitman bowed his head without speech. Silence served where sermons would have spilled. Mrs. Langley's coffee steamed like incense. Harlan shifted, shame settling into posture. For once, the town looked like it remembered. The mayor cleared his throat and stepped forward. His son stared at the ground, jaw working. "Tyler," Jack said gently, not looking away. The boy swallowed and faced the crowd. "I'm sorry," he said. "We were wrong." He didn't blame the night, the phone, or friends. He named what they'd done and who they'd hurt. He asked forgiveness like work, not magic. Jack nodded at the rope, then at the hall. "Start by tending what you rebuilt." Applause didn't break. It breathed. It sounded like people choosing to stand. The flag snapped once, right as a trumpet. Ethan's hand found Jack's sleeve and held. Sarah's yes traveled across the snow. Jack lowered his arm and looked around. A town had woken up without being shouted at. Boys had learned a language older than pride. He felt the weight inside his chest grow light. The kind of light earned, not found. The sun finally climbed past the ridge. Color spilled across roofs and faces. Ice dripped from the pole like spent anger. Jack exhaled, the breath of a long march ending. "Hold the line," he said softly to everyone. He turned to Ethan, eyes smiling without show. "Ready to learn the folds again?" he asked. "Yes, sir," the boy said, standing taller. They walked toward the hall with steady boots. Behind them the flag kept speaking in the wind. Morning light spilled through the stained glass windows of the hall. Dust drifted like gold over polished floors and fresh paint. The portraits gleamed, glass cleaned by the very hands that once defaced them. Tyler Dalton straightened a frame, stepping back, eyes quiet. Redemption, Jack thought, is louder in silence than in speech. Outside, the town gathered for the rededication. The flag rippled clean against a blue, forgiving sky. Children held smaller flags, their laughter pure and untrained. Sarah stood beside Jack, sunlight catching her tears. Ethan clutched the hem of her coat, eyes on the pole. The mayor spoke first, short, uneasy, honest enough. He thanked the efforts of good men and let his voice waver. No applause followed, just an understanding nod. Then he stepped aside, and all eyes turned to Jack. The Marine took one slow step forward, then another. He didn't carry notes. He never needed them. His words came steady, shaped by years and cost. "Honor isn't something you inherit," he said. "It's something you keep." He looked at the crowd, not above them, but through them. "When it's forgotten, we rebuild it, together." He didn't preach. He remembered. Of brothers buried, flags folded, promises kept. He spoke of Ethan's courage, Sarah's faith, the boy's repentance. He reminded them that patriotism wasn't noise, it was work. By the end, even the wind had stopped to listen. Ethan stepped forward, a small figure with brave eyes. "Can you teach me to fold it right, sir?" he asked. Jack knelt, the years falling from his shoulders. "Every fold has a meaning," he said softly, "and every meaning needs someone to remember it." Together they began, corner over corner, crease by crease. The crowd watched, breath held between reverence and release. When they finished, Ethan held the flag close, hands steady. Jack smiled faintly, the kind of smile that stays earned. It was more than ceremony. It was inheritance. Afterward, the people lingered instead of leaving. Children traced names on the memorial stone. The boys who once mocked stood guard by choice, MRs. Langley brought coffee, steaming like morning peace. The pastor didn't speak. He just nodded and stayed. Jack watched it all from the edge of the crowd. The town was alive again. Not loud, but right. He felt the old ache shift into something lighter. Maybe this was what his brothers had fought for. Not medals, moments like this, simple and free. As the flag caught one last gust of wind, he saluted. Ethan mirrored him, proud and certain. The boy's shadow fell neatly beside his own. Jack whispered, "Now it's your watch, son," and together they faced the rising sun.